welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. Bottle number 31 is a classic blended Scotch whiskey with an iconic look that was born of its origin story. It was the creation of a whiskey blender named William Sanderson from Leith in Scotland. The story goes that in 1882, he created 100 different blends, each in its own vat, and invited his friends to come and taste them. VAT 69 was the unanimous favorite, and that's what he began bottling, using the same stencil design on the label that he had used on the vat. If this bottle looks familiar to you, it may be because VAT 69 has been a bit of a media darling. From the 60s to the 90s, it was the staple drink of villains in Bollywood movies, and has appeared in a variety of books, magazines, and TV shows, like the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers. But how did it get to be so popular and well-known? The 1880s were a challenging time to create a blended Scotch. Blended Scotch combines both malt whiskey and grain whiskey, and the grain whiskey market was dominated by Distillers Company Limited, aka DCL. This was an amalgamation of several distilleries that, at its peak, controlled over 80% of the domestic and 75% of the worldwide Scotch market. Sanderson ensured his malt whiskey supply by buying into the Glengarioch distillery in Aberdeenshire. But in order to avoid DCL's near monopoly on the grain whiskey market, he banded together with a few other blenders to establish their own grain whiskey distillery, the Northern British Distillery in Edinburgh. His supply lines ensured VAT 69 became a very popular whiskey. In 1914, polar explorer Ernest Shackleton brought cases of VAT 69 along on his trans-Antarctic expedition, earmarked for medicinal and celebratory purposes. In 1933, Sanderson merged his company with Booth's Distilleries of London, and following US prohibition, VAT 69 was one of the most popular Scotch whiskies in the US market. But even this combined company was not big enough to escape DCL. That behemoth had continued to grow, expanding beyond just producing grain whiskey. In the 1920s, famous Scotch producers like Dewar's, Buchanan's, and Johnnie Walker all realized that it was better to join DCL than try to beat them. And in 1937, VAT 69 and Booth's also gave up the fight and became part of DCL. But DCL was the strong silent type. They may have controlled most of the Scotch whiskey market, but they never printed their name on any of the bottles, and they let their brands continue to grow their own followings. Like VAT 69, which by 1969 had become so successful that they moved their distillery from Leith to a bigger one in South Queensbury. Which brings us back to my tiny bottle, which is labeled very clearly as being made in Leith. What I've always been told about Grandma's collection is that she started collecting in the early to mid-1970s. But here and there, I've come across some bottles that seem like they really must have been made in the 60s, and this is one of those. So that's pretty cool. I've already tasted one great Scotch from this collection, Black Bottle Scotch from the 1970s, which I tasted with whiskey reviewer and educator Neil Murphy. Neil and I also tasted this bottle of VAT 69, so be sure to catch my next episode to find out how this bottle stood up. Neil and I are joined by my friend Mark for a fun conversation about the art of whiskey blending and more. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. You can also follow My Tiny Bottles on all your social media and check out mytinybottles.com for more about this bottle and all the bottles. Cheers!